Okay, so now let's emit smoke out of these yellow particles. For that, in our monster particles module, we need to go under particle update and search for set. And you want the set fluid source attributes. And so density in this case means smoke. 1 is usually too much, so I'll just set it to 0.5. And then we need to go to emitter summary, source, and say use emitter source. Then under emitter binding, you need to tell it which emitter you want to use, and we want to use our monster particles. So I'll just double click, delete this, and start typing emitter, and it's gonna give me the monster particles here. So just click on that, then click away for it to update, and here you go. It's already working, and the smoke is being emitted out of our character. We can turn off the sprite renderer because I don't want to see the yellow particles anymore. So now back in our scene, I can tell that it's working, except the grid is way too small. So we need to just play with the sizing of everything to make the monster fit. So this requires a bunch of back and forth of just changing the size of the grid and playing with the pivot until the monster is exactly where you want it to be inside of the grid. But since I've done this before, I'll just give you the numbers. So I'll do 2000 on the X, 1500 on the Y, and 1000 on the Z. And for the pivot, I did minus 0.2 on the X, 0.2 on the Y, and 0.48 on the Z. Now you can also move the entire grid higher until it's right on top of the ground like this. The smoke is not being evenly emitted from the character, and that's actually because of the collisions. So the smoke is born, but it immediately collides, and that just kind of kills the smoke. So what we are going to do in this case is go under collisions and collide against, and you can uncheck mesh collisions. So now the smoke is not colliding with anything, which allows it to just beautifully get spawned across the entire monster, just like this. But in this case, I actually want the smoke to collide with the ground. And so a little trick we're gonna do is we're gonna make it collide with the grid box. So here under boundary, you have open boundary minus Z. Minus Z is the ground, plus Z is the ceiling. So I will uncheck minus Z. And this means that the boundary is closed on the bottom of the grid, so it will actually collide with the floor. And so this is a great start. We have the core of the setup done, and now we just need to address the visual issues one by one and improve how this simulation looks. So just by looking at it, I want the smoke to be slightly heavy and falling toward the ground. I also want it to have more detail, so we need to increase resolution. I want to change its color to make it look more like sand. And then we can definitely work on the behavior of the smoke to get some nice turbulence and waves inside of it. So let's address it one thing after another. So under Simulation tab, we need to increase the resolution. Now I am recording this course on a 4090 RTX. Depending on the strength of your graphics card, you may not be able to set this as high as me, which is okay. This is all about just learning. So by all means, if you need to, keep this resolution low. For me, I will set it to 350 for now. For my final resolution for the trailer, I actually did 450. So already just by changing the resolution, we get much nicer behavior in the smoke. We're starting to get some nice puffs and all that. I'm also going to increase the pressure solve iterations from 6 to 10. This not only improves collisions, but it also improves the overall behavior of the smoke. Next, we said we wanted the smoke to be slightly heavy and falling down, and that's controlled with the density buoyancy. So negative buoyancy actually means that it's going up. Positive buoyancy means that it's going to be going down. In my case, I set this to 2. Now it's starting to get a bit slow for me, and that's because the simulation is running in both the viewport and Niagara. So you can just click on this button here to stop the simulation at 0, and it will only be running in our viewport from now on. But the monster is too big, and I remembered I did scale it down in the end. So you can just unlink the Niagara system just by selecting it and dragging it away. This will unlink it. And then let's set the scale of the monster to 5 instead of 10. And then you can reattach the Niagara system. So again, drag it on top of the animation and say none. And maybe move the simulation box back a little bit so it just barely covers the monster, because we don't really care what's going on the back side. We will only see it from the front. Okay, next I want to push the dust to the left. So under emitter summary, forces, you can go to wind and enable calculate wind. The wind direction needs to be -1 on the X. And for the wind magnitude, I ended up doing 40. But the smoke basically needs to be broken up with turbulence to avoid these very visible linear lines. So let's go to turbulence 1 and enable calculate turbulence. Now, as of version 5.7, you can control the frequency on each axis individually, but I just want to control all of them together with one number. So I'll click on the arrow and say vector from float. Let's leave it at 1 for now. And then we need to give it some gain. So for the turbulence gain, again, I want to click on the arrow and say vector from float. And I will set it really high so we can see it. So I'll set it to 2000. Right, so now the smoke is being completely broken up with turbulence as soon as it's born. So if I lower the frequency to 0.01, I'm essentially going to get much bigger waves. Right, so that's important to understand how the frequency works. The lower the value for the frequency, the bigger the noise waves. And the higher the number, so if I set it back to 1, the more granular and small the noise gets. So I will actually set this to 0.01, and then we need to set the value to about 500. Now even 500 is way too strong in this case. So final number, I'll set the value to 150, and let's give it a speed so that the noise changes over time. I'll set that to 1. And so we have something pretty nice and subtle, just like this. And so I'll just move our character a bit closer to frame this, maybe in a bit more interesting way. I basically want the monster to take over the whole frame to make it look huge, get the camera close to the ground, kind of looking up at the monster to make it look dominant, and move the character in the foreground just like this. We can hide the bounds of the simulation at this point, so emitter summary, simulation, uncheck draw bounds. And I would like to change the color of the smoke. So under render tab, where we haven't been yet, under smoke color, you can just start dragging this into more kind of orangey desert colors. It's very sensitive to the saturation, so already it looks too orange. So you need to do just a very subtle amount of the saturation here. Just a touch of that desert yellow. But still, it looks way too opaque and dark, so we need basically more light to penetrate the dust. For that, you